ندعوكم الآن إلى اكتشاف بعد جديد للتاريخ، والذي يتجسد في صور واللوحات والخرائط والأشياء المادية وغيرها من المصادر المرئية، بتقديم المستشارة الثقافية الأستاذة غادة المهنا.
السلام عليكم جميعاً. أنا جداً سعيدة بحضوري لهذا المؤتمر، يعطيكم ألف عافية. في الأول حابة أشكركم كلكم على حضوركم هنا. ثانياً حابة خلينا نقول نبحر في موضوع الصور. طبعاً أنا لازم أعتذر مقدماً لأن المحاضرة في اللغة الإنجليزية، لأنه عندنا ضيوف إنجليزيين، فحابين نعطيهم خلينا نقول نبذة للثقافة السعودية. So I'm going to switch to English right now. My name is Ghada Al-Mhanna, and I am someone who is in love with photography and images and visuals. But before we go into the topic and before we dive into it very deeply, I want to explore with everyone what visuals are. I've been studying visuals for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've always found visuals very, very fascinating. And after 2 years of studying the subject, I've come to personal conclusion that visuals act in a certain way. So visuals as mediations construct reality that rather than reflect it. So when we look at an image, instead of the image being a mirror to the real world, the image basically builds the ideas in our heads and kind of gives us an idea of what concepts are and what, let's say, ideas are, how do we see things in the world. And so visuals act as mediations by constructing the reality rather than reflect it, and they act as tools for conceptualizing and organizing the world. And at the same time, they preserve memory while projecting cultural and historical meaning. Visuals also act as punctum and studium, and I know you might be wondering, what is punctum, what is studium? Studium is the cultural, political, or social meanings intentionally communicated by photographs. So for example, we see PR campaigns done by institutions, by governments, by so many other companies and so on. That is studium, because they want to send you a message through the visual. And punctum is basically the unintended detail that pierces the viewer, invoking emotional understanding or an emotional perspective and response. So basically, like, let's say a spontaneous image that goes on the news, and I'm sure everyone's been following the news lately, and there has been an explosion of imagery on social media that is really evoking so many emotions. And visuals as, let's say, a way of seeing really capture moments that provoke thought and emotion and shape your perceptions by framing what is shown and omitted. So when we look at an image, we can first of all deduce what the photographer is telling us, what the photographer is paying attention to, what are the details that they want to relay to us, what are the stories that they want to tell us, and how we can, let's say, take information from these images. So as an example, we have these 2 beautiful images, and I am definitely sure this is evoking a lot of emotions in the crowd at the moment. So the image on the right is taken by Dorothea Lange. It's called Migrant Mother in 1936. It was taken in the United States. And the photograph on my right, your left, is taken by the Italian photographer Illo Battigelli in the Eastern Province in 1948. It is called The Bedouin Mother. And when we look at these pictures, we can tell both photographers unintentionally sent the message of motherhood, of struggle, of dealing with difficult social norms or dealing with situations in their reality. when we look at when the photographs were taken for both of these women, we understand the social constructs of both of these, let's say, countries or situations where the photographs were taken. So migrant mother relays the time when, in the US, there were so many migrants in the 30s, and they were really like taking their time to assimilate into the society. And so that's why this photograph really evokes a lot of emotion. And for the Saudi public, this photograph, it really touches everyone because it kind of reminds everyone about their mothers, their grandmothers, the stories that we were told about the struggles that our own families went through before all of, let's say, the development occurred in the country. So this would be, in my opinion, counted as part of visual history. And so what is visual history? Visual history is the representation of historical events, periods, and themes through visual means such as photographs, paintings, illustrations, films, infographics, and other visual media. Visual history often intersects with art history, media studies, and other disciplines. I mean, yesterday I was so excited about the whole seminar thing, and I loved how everyone had photographs in all of their presentations. And so even archaeologists, even let's say social humanities departments and studies, they all use imagery to make a point, to prove their perspectives, and to kind of like relay their messages faster so that the viewer can completely or immediately understand what is going. So I'll give you an example. This is really, truly one of my favorite photographs. It is a photograph of Eid taken in Riyadh in 1946 during King Saud's time. May he rest in peace. And the reason why I love this photograph is, first of all, you can tell that the photographer saw this kind of wall and he was standing above it, and he really wanted to take a very artistic photograph, but at the same time, he was really capturing a lot of things in the photograph. So the first thing we can deduce is that the development has started and it's going full forward. Why? Because we see the cars. The types of cars brought in, the types of cars that are parked outside, these are modern cars. However, we can also deduce that the development is still beginning to start. Why? Because at the very end of the image, you can still see the old structured buildings of Riyadh still standing. So we can tell that this is the time, okay, end of 50s is when the city of Riyadh really started or began to change. We can also look on the side of the men and let's say see how they're standing. Immediately we can tell that they're preparing for Eid prayer, because the caption from the photographer said Eid al-Fitr, and that was about it. So I, as someone who looks at this photograph, can deduce and say, okay, this image really was taken right before the prayer started, or maybe even after, and they're done and they're all going back to their cars and so on. So why do we need that? After me going through all of this and explaining what the visual is or what does it hold, why do we need visuals? Well, it's for material culture and environmental, to understand material culture and environmental interactions. So images really preserve manifestations of human culture, rituals, and practices. It gives us a holistic understanding of, let's say, how things developed over time, how these behaviors are kind of created and how these group dynamics are reported on, because the reality is no matter how much you write about a society or a community, it will still not be enough. It will not relay the practice. I can explain to you as much as possible the cultural dances in Saudi Arabia, but if I show you an image or if I show you a film of it, you will understand it a lot faster than if you read a text saying, he raises his hand this way, and he turns that way, and he does this or he does that. The third reason of why we need visual history, why do we need it, is authenticity. So records, unfortunately, sometimes can be biased. And so even when you read a report written by an Orientalist, there's always a doubt where you think, well, is this completely true or not? I don't know if it is. But for me personally, as someone from Saudi, when I see these images, I'm able to identify certain things from my culture that the photographer probably did not even see, that the photographer probably did not even care about at the time, that the photographer really didn't, let's say, pay attention to. And so that is why it's really important to have visual history. So what can we learn from the visuals? Well, we learn material cultures and interactions, so we can see clothes, buildings, architecture, anything that's, let's say, physically touched. We can see how it happened and how it interacts with the environment. We can understand social dynamics, rituals, and beliefs. So how do people pray? What was important at a time? You know, we all know that the country was conservative at some point of time. So when we look at images, what let's say, motives of conservatism was practiced in the country during a certain period of time. We also have the evolution of culture and the passing of time. So, you know, we are very lucky right now to be developing at a very fast rate. And our country has really, we're very blessed with this, has developed in a fast rate. And we tend to forget what we had before when we go through these developments. So it's very, very important that when we look at these things, we understand and compare and analyze how this evolution occurred over time. Oh, sorry, no. Okay, so how do you approach reading a visual? Well, you try to understand the motives and the meaning. So when you look at a photograph, you look at what is available. Sometimes the simplest mark in a photograph can open like a Pandora's box of information and really astound you with all these, let's say, details. It helps to place a visual in their temporal framework. So I know this image was taken, let's say, around the 50s. I read a book about the development of Saudi in the 50s. I can place this image with the text written by a historian, and this room is filled with historians, you know? And so it is really, let's say, a collaborative work of providing an image to kind of create the perception in your mind to build this, let's say, reality in your mind to understand what has happened. And we also examine design details, so the colors, the materials, the craftsmanship, and this to us indicates daily life, social status, and of that network. So this is now my favorite part. Now we're done with all the, let me put it this way, all the boring stuff. I just wanted to tell you, everyone, how we go through this, but now is the fun part. So now we'll talk about the material culture. Okay, 1 second. Okay. Aren't these photographs beautiful? They are so beautiful. The photograph on the left, the photograph on the left was taken in London in 1927, and on October. And the photograph or the illustration on the left, or on the right, is of Imam Abdullah bin Saud, the final Imam of the first state of Diriyah. What can we deduce from these two photographs? These two men are members of the royal family. This is what we know. What we also know is they still dress somewhat similarly. It's interesting that we are able to deduce that from that time, which is 1818, at the time of the death, at the time that the illustration was made, till 1927, there's been a lot of development in types of clothes and styles that happened. But at the same time, we're able to deduce that there has been, let's say, an embrace of fashion. There is a sense of fashion within the family, that there's a lot of the types of fabrics that are shared, the types of, let's say, the bish that is worn. I know that the image on the left is not colored, but because it was taken at a time when we still have some of these clothes, we can tell that it was either black or brown or any of the colors that exist today. And then when we look at the image on the right, we can say, okay, that was a type of bisht, it was a certain type of color, it was a certain type of style. So it's interesting that that developed from that to this. And at the same time, when we look at this today, I mean, look around the room. Is anyone wearing this type of shmagh? Not really. Even in winter, I mean, we are in December and it is winter. So, you know, that's another sense of development where there is some sort of unification of style amongst the men in the country, where this type of shmagh doesn't really exist so much, but is very unique and is only worn in very specific types of incidences. There are these two images. The image on the left is of Her Royal Highness Princess Hissa bint Salman. The image on the right are gifts from King Abdulaziz, may God rest his soul, to Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1945. When we look at these two images, we can deduce the style that was prominent in Najd in the past. We can try to understand that there was a sense of color, there was a sense of, let's say, detailed embroidery. There is an embrace of style. This exists within the royal family specifically and within the people of Najd generally. So when we look at these two, we are able to kind of extract this kind of information. And at the same time, you know, the way the dresses are overlaid in the pictures, it is very fascinating to see, personally for me, to see the orange piece on the purple dress, where it just shows you the added, let's say, style onto the clothing, which to me personally deduces that there was such an important value placed on paying attention to the minute details of clothing in the past, that the sense of style was so important privately that it was taken very seriously. We can also tell the sense of dir'iyah, you know, through manuscripts. Maybe we don't have images of dir'iyah from like the first Saudi state or the second Saudi state, but what we do have are manuscripts. What we do have are carvings on the walls. What we do have are things that exist. And so when we take a look at these things, we identify patterns. We see that let's say the circular pattern is important, the flower shape is important, the way it was styled, the colors that were used, all of these hold lots of value for the people of Dir'iyah. And so we can deduce in a way and think, okay, so if they had valued the color orange, was orange in the clothing of the women? Did the women wear orange in their pieces of attire? Did they include it in their day-to-day life? They used it in the manuscripts, so is it really hard to believe that they had used it also in their pieces of clothing? This is another manuscript. It's very beautiful and very detailed. And to be very honest, very surprising, because for the longest time, people really believed there was not much of a visual culture in let's say, Riyadh and Dir'iyah and Najd as a whole, that there's not much of a visual culture, that there's not an appreciation of arts and beauty. But this really defeats all these arguments by saying, why would someone spend so much time sitting on a book, drawing these manuscripts, and paying such articulate detail to the colors that are used and to the, let's say, the style of writing? I mean, listen, I'll be very honest with everyone. I've seen really bad handwriting in my research. And when I see stuff like this, it really makes me think someone must have written this 5, 6, 7 times so it comes off this beautiful. And that is such attention to detail that it really reflects the importance of beauty in the city of Diriyah. This is one of my favorite illustrations. It was made by Harold Dickinson when he visited Riyadh in 1937, and it is of the Murabba Palace on the inside. Now, what can we deduce from this photo? I'm sure someone's going to be like, well, Ghada, this is not Diriyah, this is in Riyadh. I'm like, yes, that's very true. However, we know that the royal family left Diriyah and based themselves in Riyadh and built the city of Riyadh. This is their style inside their homes. This is something that they took from their homes in Diriyah and took it to them with them to Riyadh to kind of continue. So we can immediately deduce from the style that they have really paid such articulate attention to the beauty of the inside. Like, I'm sure everyone, when they look outside in Riyadh or in the older buildings, they think, oh, they're all brown, they're all beige, they all just look very simple like the mud houses. But the surprising fact is that the beauty on the inside is very highly valued. So what does this tell you about the society? The society values private life over public life. Public life is momentary, however, private life is always consistent. So my private life needs to be very beautiful because I deserve to see beauty all around me. Yeah, that's basically it. So also just the using of the colors, the patterns. I mean, this one is also based off of an image. So there's an illustration and an image of this. So this is kind of, let's say, imagined in a way. Images can also tell us a lot about social dynamics. So this is, I'm going to keep saying a lot that this is my favorite photo. Like, I have too many favorite photographs. So the photograph on the left is of His Majesty King Abdulaziz, may God rest his soul, in Sahat al-Safat performing Al-Arda. It was taken in 1936. And the photograph on the right is the custodian of the two holy mosques, King Salman, may God protect him, and other members of the royal family also performing the Arda. When we look at these two images, we can tell that this is a practice that was carried on from that time. Maybe the period is quite short, maybe that's the argument people would have, but at the same time, it's fascinating to see how this practice was also developed. At the time, in this performance, we don't see a flag, but now we do. And so the performance as such has developed. We see other things. We see how more touches of the royal family is included in these kind of performances. Unfortunately, I do not know when this is taken, and I do not know who the photographer is. However, what I do know, it was taken in Diriyah. You might ask, what social practice can we deduce from this image? Well, if you notice, the young boys are wearing bishts. And today, I mean, look around you. Is anyone wearing a bisht right now? That's a development we can deduce and we can immediately sense and we see. Bishts were part of the daily life 40 years ago. People would go out in the city, the men would go out into the city wearing bishts. And today, bishts are reserved for only certain social practices such as weddings, official events, and openings, such as yesterday. You know, yesterday when the seminar was opened, we saw some of the men coming over wearing bishts. So bishts have now kind of an elevated status in the Saudi community, whereas before it still had an elevated status, but it was seen as a daily practice to be worn. You can also think to yourself, okay, then why were they wearing the bisht? You can look at the thobes that the young men are wearing. Again, I look out into the sea of white thobes in front of me. They're all very tailored. They all look nice. You know, keep in mind, this society likes to look nice. And so maybe the thobes weren't very well fitted. Maybe the button was a little off. Maybe the tailoring was a little off. So the bisht kind of covers it up. You still look nice and classy as you go out into the street. And you still hold this value to yourself and to others that you look nice. We can also see practices, certain things that have developed over time. So this is an image of the Saudi cavalry from the first Saudi state, and this is a picture of the National Guard in the 70s. So we can see how the clothing's kind of developed. They're still all riding horses, thank God, but at the same time, we can just find the interesting link between them. There's always, let's say, a certain doubt of these illustrations from Orientalists, and I completely understand that, and I completely sympathize with that. However, these images still hold a lot of value because we are able to take them, decipher them, and try to understand what is true for us and what can we leave on the side and say, I mean, that's a bit exaggerated. That wasn't really what happened. We can also look at evolution. You know, this is a photo of Diriyah in 1918, taken by John Philby. And I mean, I know it's not a very clear image, but we can still see some of the buildings. And I know I cheated a little bit. This was an image in the presentation, so I just kept it. This is part of the new developments in Diriyah. This is the newly, let's say this is one of the palaces that was renovated, and we can immediately see that was not renovated, that was not fixed, that was the state that the buildings were at in the past. However, this is what it is today. And so it really helps us understand, okay, what are we able to preserve? What are we able to kind of continue to the future? And what are we able to kind of, let's say, keep within our society, how things go. Yeah, I don't know where that thought was taking me. We can also see what is kind of brought into the project. So I personally know that that in the DGDA projects, when they try to create new interactive, let's say, areas in the region, in the city, they always look at old photographs. And this is always so fascinating because you really need to understand and see, okay, I want to build a new building. I want to do something really creative and really nice, but I do not want to let go of my authentic culture. I still need to push forward, but I don't want to forget my ancestors. So what do I have? Photographs. So no matter the text I read, I still need a photograph to look at to understand where can I go, how do I develop further. So after this fun segment of images, how do we extract these photographs or methods of extracting photographs? Well, looking at different cultures really help, you know? Najd is affected by regions surrounding it. Najd is affected by countries surrounding it, and Najd is affected by cultures surrounding it. So when we look at different cultures, we are able to decipher, okay, this piece of fabric I know came from India, and I know this was woven in Najd. So I know the value was placed in the type of fabric, and I know that my people were traders, and I know, and I know, and I know. So it just adds a little, let's say, interpretation and kind of a unique system of understanding how things develop. There's also, let's say, an anthropological context into reading images. So when I look at an artifact, personally speaking, I must avoid ethnocentric perspectives, meaning from Arabs, only Arabs. This attitude does not work. The reality of the world is that it's always moving. Humans move. This is the nature of humanity. And cultures move. And one of the things, you know, we as Arabs really pride in is that we are a trading culture. And so it is very natural that a trading culture consistently exchanges, not just material things, but also social practices. So maybe, you know, I like a certain type of bukhur that I smelled in Oman, and the Omanis only use it. But you know, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to use it in Najd. And then 50 years later, it's part of a Najdi practice. So do I say, no, that's a different type of culture, it's not mine? Or do I say, no, it started from there, but then I later adopted it, and it became an integral part of my society? So it's very important to understand how this kind of developed and happened over time. We have to also, when reading a photograph, acknowledge that there's an observer looking or taking the photograph. The reality is, in Saudi Arabia, that most of the photographs of the past were taken by people not from the region, period. They were taken by, I don't want to say outsiders, they were taken by observers. So when Ilo, for example, in the very early images that I shared, when Ilo Battigelli took the photo, in 1948, he saw something. As an Italian who was very far away from home, who was in the desert, he saw something and he took that image. And he wanted to relay a message to either people back home, because he kept sending images back to his family, or he wanted to understand how the Saudi society is, And so obviously when photographers take an image, they take a bit of themselves and place it in the image. So the framing, the lighting, the way they even, let's say, develop the photographs. Some of them choose to do it today digitally, some of them want to stay analog. And so that means something. That means something, so that's why it's very important to, let's say, look at it to understand why the image is as such and what can we learn from it. So it's also very important to visualize a timeline. So I'm going to just do a basic example. This is like the timeline of Diriyah. I know this is not, Diriyah has a lot of history, so I just kind of like crunched it up in a few little timelines. So we have the early settlements, the founding of Diriyah, the siege, the 20th century preservation, and today. And I want to take the siege of Diriyah. You start collecting images, you start grabbing as much content, visual content as possible to kind of reflect to you what was happening at the time, even if it was someone observing what was happening from the outside. This is so important. So, for example, the image on the far right, this is of it was recorded at least, is of Imam Abdullah bin Saud in Cairo after the siege. So we can tell, okay, by the dress, by the outfit, this is quite accurate in a way. However, maybe the setting is not very quite so accurate. And personally speaking, this is where it's so viable and important, the role of historians come in. Because as a visual researcher, as much of content we pull out, as much as analysis we make, we need historians with us to tell us all the details of the history of all the happenings of the time, to have us really understand what happened, why are we here, what is going on, and what is true and what is not. So again, for example, the image on above is during the fight. And, the artist probably really wanted to evoke emotions in the observer. So, we see a soldier holding his mate, his friend, as he continues fighting the Ottomans during the siege. So what are the key takeaways? Because as much as I enjoy this and as much as I love talking about photographs, I know we're very limited on time. The key takeaways are visuals are mediations of meaning and emotional resonance. They give us this kind of feeling and understanding, or let's say a shocking understanding of how life was in the past or in the present. Visual records can be used as tangible evidence of daily life, social structure, and historical shifts. And one must combine insights from other fields of sciences when looking at visuals. So my work would have no value if it weren't for the historians, archaeologists, social scientists behind this work, relaying, correcting the information, adding their own input. History and culture is a collaborative work. This is something that is very important and very viable. And to extract visual narratives, symbolic analysis of context and analyzing design are a way of approaching it. Now, I want to just leave you with one final question to everyone, because, you know, we're here today, we all see the cameras moving back and forth and taking pictures. And this is the question I want to leave with is, what stories will future generation uncovers from the visuals of today?
Thank you so much, Ms. Ghada. What a beautiful lecture. I'm going to turn towards the audience right now for any questions.
أولاً اعذروني أنني لم أعتد على أن أسأل وأتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية وأنا في بلدي، ويحضرني بيت الشاعر: إنما المرأة والمرء سواء في الجدارة، علموا المرأة فالمرأة عنوان الحضارة. أشكرك أيها المتميزة غادة المهنا. حقيقة لغة، أداء، ثقة، شجاعة، مضامين جميلة جدا استطعت أن تؤديها وأن توصليها إلينا نحن الذين نستمع إليك بشوق، ولو حاضرت إلى آخر النهار لما مللنا يعلم الله. حقيقة سمعت عنك الشيء الكثير من أمك سعادة الأستاذة الدكتورة فوزية، وعادة الأمهات يبالغن حينما يذكرن الأبناء، لكنني وجدتك من خلال هذه المحاضرة متقدمة على ما ذكرته أمك بمراحل. حقيقة لا أملك إلا أن الدعاء لك بأن يحفظك الله وأن يحرسك وأن يزيدك من فضله وأن ينفع بك وبعلمك. أنت والله فخر هذا الوطن، وشكرا.
فهد الدامغ، أستاذ بقسم التاريخ والحضارة بجامعة الإمام محمد بن سعود الإسلامية. أثني وأؤكد على ما قاله أستاذنا الأستاذ الدكتور أحمد الزيلعي: محاضرة جميلة، جميلة بمضامينها، جميلة بالصور التي عرضت فيها، جميلة بالعرض الرصين الاحترافي السهل الممتنع الذي أسعدتنا به أستاذة غادة. أتفق معك تماما في أن التاريخ المرئي مهم جدا ويجب العناية به. أتفق معك تماما أن الصورة تأتي في مقدمة منظومة المصادر التاريخية، بل أقول، وهذا يعني اتجاه لدي وتأكد مما سمعته منك، أنها من أقوى المصادر وأصدقها. في نظري أنها أقوى من الوثيقة. المؤرخون يقولون لا تاريخ بدون وثائق. الصورة أصدق في التعبير عن الواقع. كما ذكرتي، الصورة يمكن أن يخرج منها بحث يتحدث عن الملابس، يستخلص منها المستوى الاجتماعي والاتجاه الثقافي وغيره كثير. يعني صورة واحدة يمكن أن يكتب عنها بحث. فيه سؤال فرعي، هذا كلام، وقد رأيت اهتمامك بالصور التاريخية للملك عبد العزيز رحمه الله وهكذا. دار نقاش بيني وبين زملاء متخصصين. كنت مهتما بأمر اهتمام الملك عبد العزيز رحمه الله بالإبل، اللي استمعنا في المحاضرة الماضية عن شيء منها. فتساءلنا: هل يوجد صورة للملك عبد العزيز يمتطي الإبل؟ الغريب أنه عاش مع الإبل رحمه الله ووحد هذه البلاد على ظهورها مدة طويلة. ما استطعنا أن نجد صورة واضحة. وجدنا على الخيل، نعم. فهل مر عليك من خلال يعني اهتمامك والرصيد الذي لديك صورة للملك عبد العزيز يمتطي الإبل؟ وشكرا.
يعطيك العافية دكتور. صراحة في الوقت الحالي لا، ما عن نفسي أنا للأسف ما لقيت، لكن أنا عندي ثقة صراحة. يعني حنا لأننا في صدى خلينا نقول اكتشاف غير ذواتنا لكن اكتشاف ثقافتنا اللي خلينا نقول كثير من الناس جو وصورونا ومشوا. ففي كنز هائل في العالم منتشر الآن، وأنا عندي ثقة تامة أنه يمكن صورة واحدة تطلع من أرشيف شخص شخصي يعني بعد زمن طويل، يمكن هو ما أدري أو هي تتوفى ويطلع الصورة لأرشيف معين أو لمتحف معين أو للأمور هذه. فدائما تصير مال الأشياء هذه، آملين يعني.
جميل. طيب أنا عادل خميس، من متخصص في النقد من جامعة الملك عبد العزيز. أنا حقيقة لا أريد أن أواصل المديح، أخاف يكبر راسك علينا، لكن للحق برافو برافو. هذا يعني العرض ممتع مفيد بذكاء ورشاقة، أحسنتي. لكنك تعلمين أنك تلمسين مسألة حساسة هنا، نسميها ندعوها نحن كتابة التاريخ. في كتابة التاريخ تجتمع عادة العلامات اللسانية والعلامات غير اللسانية اللي تناولتها اليوم لبناء الذاكرة وتأثيثها. هذا التأثيث نسميه narratives، السرديات، سردية التاريخ. نحن أهل النقد الأدبي حللنا المسألة. الآن من يستطيع أن يسيطر على الذاكرة يستطيع أن يسيطر على الحقيقة. No matter about the truth, we know that. هذه نقطة مهمة جدا جدا. كيف كانت هذه المسألة تشغلك وأنت مهتمة، وأنا أتابعك في تويتر وكذا، وأنت مهتمة بهذا الجزء بتأثيث التاريخ؟ الفكرة الآن مع الصورة أننا نحن نعتمد على تقنية مشهورة، عملية معروفة نسميها التأويل، لعبة التأويل. فنؤول ونبني قصصا، هذه القصص نسيطر فيها على الذاكرة، ومن هنا نحن نسيطر على التاريخ وعلى الحاضر. حبيبنا نزار قباني حل المسألة بالنسبة لنا. الحب في الأرض شيء من تصورنا، لو لم نجده عليها لاخترعناه. هل هذا ما نفعله بالتاريخ أيضا؟ شكرا جزيلا لك.
أستاذ عادل، يعني أول شيء شكرا على السؤال. أنا شخص واحد، حنا الله يحفظنا كلنا فوق 30 مليون أو 18 مليون سوري. كل واحد عنده نظرة للي ما هي الحقيقة، وكل واحد عنده نظرة اللي ما هي القصة. هذا واقع. شخصياً أنا أشوف دوري أني أنبش وأحط للعامة ويلا نتناقش، لأنه هذا تاريخ مشترك. وصراحة ما أنه أحط مسؤولية، لكن هذا أيضاً مسؤولية المؤرخين أنهم يتابعون المجتمع ويكتبون ويرصدون ما الذي يحدث. لأني أنا شخصياً أنا ما أصف نفسي بأني مؤرخة، لكن أنا مهتمة في تطورات المجتمع في خلال الصور، ومهتمة في معرفة ما هو القصة خلينا نقول الحقيقية المجتمع اللي بيننا. لأنه مثلا يمكن أحد خالق حقيقة في رأسه تختلف عن حقيقة شخص آخر، لكن صورة واحدة تطمر كل الحقيقتين هذولي، لأن الصورة تكسر القصة.
شكرا لك أستاذة غادة. Please do give me a round of applause for Ms. Ghada for today, and such an amazing lecture from Ms. Ghada. Thank you. The next session delves into the role of horse breeding, trade, and their cultural significance in Najd and Arab society during the 19th century, as seen through European perspectives. Titled The Arabian Horse in 19th Century Najd, Trade, Tradition, and Cultural Significance, the lecture will be presented by Dr. Daniel Golbowski, a researcher.